Hey, everybody. Welcome to First Draft Friday. I am your guest host, Lucy Score. Alessandra Torre couldn't be here today, so I am happy to step in and wear her shoes. I'm just kidding. I'm not actually wearing her shoes. I am here with author Steffanie Holmes, and we are going to talk about Stephanie's drafting process called the skeleton draft method today. I don't know about you guys, but I love talking about process and outlining and drafting. And I am super nosy. I was just telling Steph this. I'm very nosy. I love getting to know what everybody else's process is like. So Steph, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey Lucy, thank you so much, and thank you so much everyone for coming here and listening to me yammer on about drafting. So yeah, my pen name is Steffanie Holmes, and my real name is Steff, and I write paranormal romance, gothic romance, anything that's a bit kind of dark and sexy and sinful. That's kind of where I'm happy. And I've published over 40 books, and I write a book sort of roughly every 2 months, I would say. And I'm a USA Today bestselling author, so yeah, life's pretty good.
That's awesome. That's amazing. That is a fast writing process. I'm saying that as somebody who slogs through it. So I'm guessing that you credit some of that efficiency to the skeleton draft method.
Yes, especially because I am, when we talk about writers and how we like to plot and how we like to outline, we often kind of split into two groups: the people, the plotters, or the architects, the people who like to plan everything out before they start, and the pantsers or the gardeners who like to kind of figure it all out as we go. And I am a gardener or a pantser, and we people who fall on that end of the spectrum, we tend to be the ones who kind of take a long time to write a book because we don't quite know what's going to happen next. And the skeleton drafting has enabled me as, one of those discovery writers to, be able to kind of keep up that pace, which helps me be quite competitive as an indie author. So that's been really interesting.
That's wonderful. So when did you start writing?
Such a funny question because all of us as writers, we were always like, well, I started when I was like 7, and I wrote a story about my cat, but no one really wants to know about the story about my cat. But I wrote my first book that I self-published in 2014. I think I'd been writing it for like 5 years before that. So
that sounds about right. That's how you do the first book.
Yeah, that's the first book. The first book is 5 to 10 years of work. And that was a science fiction book. And then I wrote my first paranormal romance in 2015, basically as a dare. Because a friend was at a party one day. We were talking about 50 Shades of Grey, and I was kind of rubbishing it a bit. And my friend said, well, it's not like you could write a book like that. And I thought, well, maybe I can. And I did. And it sold. It kind of went crazy when I published it on this secret pen name that I never intended to reveal to anyone. I sort of had to tell my husband one day. I said, oh, look, I've made all this money this month. I've sold all these books, but it's not my super serious science fiction. It's this like 30,000 word novella about a fox shapeshifter. And when he stopped laughing at me, he said, are we gonna write any more? And I thought, well, yeah, I am. And yeah, that was about 5 years ago. And
that's awesome. That's great. Well, congratulations on your success, because 40 books in that amount of time is amazing. I think that's incredible. We have some people chiming in the comments. They are excited. They are all excited about talking about plotting and outlining and drafting as well. Hi, everybody. Drop in the comments. Tell us, are you a pantser? Are you a plotter? Do you abhor both labels? Where do you fall on the spectrum of how you write your books? So, Steff, tell us what inspired you to come up with the skeleton method? Were you struggling with a particular part of the process and that's what helped you come up with it? How did it go?
Basically, I thought this was how everyone wrote a book. And then I started talking to other writers and found out that no one that I've ever talked to writes a book the way I write a book. And I started kind of taking a look at my process from the outside and going, well, why do I want to do it like that? What makes me want to write a book in this way, and kind of picking it apart and figuring it out. And I started to realize that maybe there was some things in there that could actually help other people. And so I gave it actually Alessandra gave it the name because I was talking to some of her students about the way I plot a book, and she went, I've never heard anyone write a book with a skeleton draft before. And I'm a bit of a goth, so I was like, skeleton draft, that's a great name for it. So yeah, so I didn't realize people plotted books, outlined books in completely different ways. Until I started kind of looking at it.
That's pretty cool. So instead of a gardener, I guess you could be considered a grave robber.
Yeah, I like that. Let's go with that.
So we have Nicole Eby is a recovering pantser, which means she's stuck somewhere in the middle. So she's a thong, although that might mean flip-flops in New Zealand. Lee Dobbins is a plotter with ridiculous 15,000 word outlines for 50,000 word books. Lee, I bet that gets you pretty far in your writing process. Angela chimes in. She says she plots it out and then runs off track while writing. That is what I do too. And Hattie says she's in the middle, but mostly pants. She wants to plot so badly. So can you break it down for us a little bit, the difference between plotting versus outlining versus just jumping right in?
So I guess the best way to kind of do this is I'll tell you what a skeleton draft actually is. And basically what it is it's like you're talking about your 15,000 word outline for your 50,000 word book. And basically the skeleton draft is a 15,000 word outline, except it's the book. It is like a fast draft of your entire book from the beginning to the end, but there's like no description. There's no kind of like waffling around talking about what the scenes look like. I don't even put descriptions of characters in there. I don't know what anyone looks like. It's mostly just like dialogue and action, and the whole point of it is to figure out the shape of the book. How do you get your characters from the beginning to the end? How do the characters shape what happens in the book? And you can do that really fast in this kind of flurry of creative activity, right at the beginning. And then at the end, instead of having a 15,000 word outline, you have got the first 15,000 words of your book, and you can then go back. And from the beginning of the skeleton draft, you can go through it, and you can actually build what I call the first draft of the book, the actual kind of proper draft, the one that you might sort of be okay to show someone else. Because definitely the skeleton draft, you definitely can't show anyone because it's horrible. It's very messy.
Huh. Okay, I'm going to stop you right there because I already just got something super important out of this talk. Because when I outline, I'm not writing it like it's the book. I'm saying, and then he did this or she, and it's not in the correct tense that the book is going to be in. It's not, I'm literally writing it as notes or an outline. So when I go back to actually draft it, all of that stuff has to be rewritten because it's not even in the correct tense or viewpoint or anything. So that's That's very smart. Good job, Steff. That's very smart.
Exactly. And I think I have like this real resistance. I think that's one of the reasons I've always had such a resistance to outlining, because I felt like, well, I'm just going to have to. I mean, one thing is that, I feel like if I outline, then I'll know everything that happens, and the actual writing of the book won't be interesting to me. I'll be like, well, why would I write that story? Because I know the story now.
Mm.
And then the second thing is I feel like I just want to write a book. So why am I writing this thing that's not a book? I just want to write the book. So I've always felt a real resistance to that. And so that's why I think I do this thing, which is basically, it really is just an outline. It's like I sit down and I write chapter 1, and I just write everything that I think's going to happen in that first scene. And the key to being able to write a skeleton draft is that in the beginning you have to have 3 things. You have to have a character, you have to have the protagonist in your head, and you don't have to have all the details about them. You just have to kind of sort of have a sense of them, because you're getting to know them as you build your skeleton draft. And then by the time I go back at the end to do my first draft over the skeleton draft, I know that character really, really well. And so I can kind of fill in the gaps that I've left for them. So you have to have a protagonist. You have to have a hook, which for me is usually the idea that kind of sparked the story in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
But the hook has to have some kind of conflict, because you have to have some idea of what the conflict in the story is.
Right. Can you give us an example of maybe one of your hooks from one of your books?
Yeah. So I have a series, which is one of my more popular series, called the Nevermore Bookshop Mystery Series, and it's a paranormal romance series. It's actually a reverse harem series, and it's set in a magical bookshop that brings literary characters from books to life. And that was the idea that sparked the story. I think I was watching Black Books at the time, and I thought it would be really fun to have a series set in a bookshop, where kind of characters came to life, and so our heroine could fall in love with Heathcliff, like the actual literary characters. That would be really fun.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a really cool hook, but there's no conflict. And that's just an idea. But to make it a hook, it became a murder mystery series. So each book is a murder mystery, and the first book, the hook is that the heroine, her old best friend is found dead in the shop, and she is blamed for the murder. So she's trying to clear her own name. So that's the spark of the conflict that you need to know in order to start the draft. So that's all I knew when I began the book. I had a sense of who the heroine was. I knew it was going to be this magical bookshop that brought literary characters to life, and I knew it was going to be a murder mystery. And then the third thing you have to know is how the book is going to end. And all you have to know is like a sense of the resolution of the plot, which usually comes from knowing the genre of the book. So my books are paranormal romance, and they have an element of mystery. So I know that at the end has to be a happily ever after. That's really, I don't know how it's going to happen, but it has to happen. And I know that if it's a murder mystery, then anyone who reads a murder mystery, at the end, all they want to know is how all the pieces fit together.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's the fun thing, is figuring out the puzzle. And so I have to give them the solution to the puzzle. And that's it. That's all I need to know. And from those 3 things, I can start building a plot.
Wow. Does anybody have any questions? Please chime in the comments, and we will do our best to answer them. Lara says she feels the same way about outlines. Once she's done with it, she's bored of the story. And I think that is actually a pretty common thing, especially if you've put so much of your effort into the outline and you just kind of used up a whole lot of energy to not go very far. So this is very smart. I'm seeing JD is answering somebody's question. Oh, yeah. So some people, I can't see your names because it's showing up as Facebook user. So somebody says, so this kind of helps keep the secret of the books even from yourself? Question mark.
Yes, kind of. And I mean, when you finished the skeleton draft, you know a lot more than you did obviously when you began the skeleton draft, but you still I often end up with a lot of surprises when I do the second draft. And I kind of feel like I love writing the skeleton draft. I love putting the story together, but I think one of the most fun things about writing for me is when you have all these separate little pieces and they start to fall into place, like everything falls into place, and the little kind of clues that you made for yourself at the beginning that you have no idea what they're gonna, what's gonna happen, and then suddenly it clicks into place at the end, and you're like, actually, I'm kind of a genius. and, um, and that's a really fun part of writing, and I feel like for me, if I had to outline a book, I would lose a little bit of that kind of magic, which and if writing's not fun, I don't want to do it, and it's my job, so got to do it. It's funny. You might be thinking, well, like, if I've only got those three things, how do I actually get like 15,000 words out of that? And the answer is kind of, well, you've got the hook in the middle, so you know that the hook of the book is going to have to be revealed very early on. So, like ideally in the first scene. So very early on in my series, in my story, I need to have the murder happen. I need to have this girl arrive at the bookshop. I need to have this murder happen, and I need to have her blamed for it. And I need to introduce these three guys, because they're the heroes. And so right there, I've got like three scenes. And then you can start to build on that. You've got those three. So what scenes in this book do readers expect to be there? And a lot of that's got to do with genre. So, if this is a murder mystery, there's got to be obviously the scene where the murder's discovered. There's got to be the scene where things escalate. So that's like when your heroine gets given the like threatening note, or the second body is discovered, or something like that. So there's got to be that scene. So that's another scene. There's got to be the scenes where there's the red herrings. So that might be another three scenes. There's got to be a scene where that she confronts the murderer. So that's another scene. And then you build the romance scenes on top of that. And then the character is the person who moves the plot forward. Plot doesn't happen without characters. And so I'm always asking myself, I'm like, whenever I feel a little bit stuck, or I feel like I've got a scene here and a scene here and I don't know how to get in between them, as I just say, well, what would this character do next? And I always try to bring it back to what would this character do based on her personality, based on her, her past wounds, what's her next move? Mm-hmm. And that move, is often very different depending on who the character is. And that's how, as a person who hasn't planned anything in advance, how you can start to build this kind of list in your head of, okay, I know what the next couple of scenes are. I know what the next couple of scenes are. And, that way you can move through the book. And when you're writing the scenes, you're not writing them in like intense detail. Often I split the book into chapters as I go. Because I'm always like, oh, that's a really great cliffhanger ending for the chapter. So I just write that one line and move it to the next page and start the new chapter. But often they're just like 10 lines of dialogue, or like a choppy description of a fight scene, or a description of the heroine finding the second body, or something like that. Often they're just notes to myself, like insert sex scene here.
Insert dead body. Insert.
Yeah, often they're just notes like that. So it's just very choppy, and but the important thing is that I'm just moving forward, and I'm like, right, I know what that scene's going to be. What's the next scene? What's the next scene? And I'm kind of building the shape of the novel.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, that's very smart. Alessandra is here. Hi, Alessandra.
Hi, Alessandra.
Thanks for letting me take over temporarily. Alessandra wants to know, how long does it take you to write a first draft or outline?
About 3 days.
Ooh.
So sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less, but that's like the fastest part of my process. That's like 3 days for like 20,000 words. And usually I'm a sort of a 3,000 to 4,000 words a day kind of girl.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like, yeah, it always feels like a really great kind of motivator right at the beginning of a project to kind of look back at your book and go, well, I've been at this 3 days and I've already got 15,000 words and I've already got my plot and I know what's going to happen and I'm ready to rock.
Nice. Rachel Goodman asks, and I think you actually partially answered this already about moving each scene forward. What's the most important thing for constructing your middle? Do you have a litmus test for how a plot point will or won't work?
Oh, I think really all of this always comes back to that character and the story that you're trying to tell about the character. And I try to, when I feel like I'm getting bogged down in plot details, like how do I make this thing happen? Which I find is often the problem with the middle of books, is that you've got all these kind of plot details that you try to shove in. And it can feel a bit like you're losing the pacing and you're losing kind of the thing that you're interested in the book in the first place. And I think it's important to always bring it back to character. And I personally find whenever I'm writing a scene and I'm like, this feels really boring to me, or it feels really convoluted, or it feels like it's just not working. And every time I feel like that, if I kind of take a wide look and look at the scene, I realize that the problem is that the scene doesn't fit the character, or it's not what the character would naturally do, or I'm trying to shove the plot into the character instead of letting the character guide what happens. And as soon as I go wide and I say, what would this character actually do in this situation? And that kind of escalating tension of all the things that have previously happened to this character kind of converging in together to bring you to that sort of dark night of the soul part of the book. That's kind of the litmus test I would use.
I like it. That's smart. Jay Farmer asks, do you add in subplots for other characters during your draft? Or does that come when you go back to the beginning?
Yes, I do if I know them, or sometimes I will have bits of them, but not everything. But if I know them, if they're scenes that come into my head as part of the book, then usually they'll be in there. Probably by the end of a skeleton draft, I'll have the rough idea of maybe 30 chapters in the book, and my books are roughly 40 chapters. So there's sort of still space to add other things that I haven't quite put together properly yet. But most of that kind of subplot stuff I'll have a vague idea. I mean, I guess this method, I have not tried it on like a super multi, epic fantasy with like 20 different characters. So I don't know how well it would hold up in that situation. But I did write a 5-book paranormal romance series with 6 point of view characters, and that held up. This method held up for that.
That's great. Yeah, that's a good point. With epic fantasy, where you have a cast of many, you might spend a lot more time. every point of view might get its own skeleton draft at that point. Kaylina, yes, we can see your name now. Thanks for doing that. We appreciate it. Margaret says, I always struggle with the opening scene, finding that first sentence when you use the skeleton draft method. Is this something you worry about when you start, or do you worry about this after the initial draft?
After. I start where, in my head where I have that first kind of that first hook, like that first idea of, with this series, the Nevermore bookshop series, the whole hook of the series is about this girl who works in this bookshop where literary characters come to life. So the first scene, I need to get her to the bookshop. So that's kind of where I started. But I never sit down and stare at the page and go, oh crap, am I definitely starting this in the right place? I just start, and then later, if I have to delete something or I have to add something, that's perfectly okay. But half the time a lot of the time you don't know what you don't know. And when you start skeleton draft, there's a lot you don't know about the book. That's kind of the point. And so you have to be okay going, I don't know what I don't know, but I do know that this scene is definitely in the book somewhere near the beginning. So that's where I can start now.
Gotcha. There's two questions that are kind of similar. One is from Facebook user and one is from Lee. And they're both asking about how do you stop yourself from waffling, like writing too much as you're drafting? And Lee's question's a little more specific about how do you not worry about transitioning and tying the scenes together in your skeleton draft?
So the reason why you start with that ending in your head, even if you don't know how all the pieces are going to fit together because you don't have the pieces yet, the reason you start with that ending in your head is so that you don't waffle, so that you always have a direction. Like the character is the one that leads the way, but the story has an X marks the spot effectively, and your character is going to get to that X marks the spot in their own way. But you as the author know that they have to get there. They can't go to Y or the pub. And I always think when I write, and even when I write the skeleton draft, I always think every word in a book has one of two purposes, and usually it's best if it does both purposes, and those purposes are to move the plot forward or to deepen the character. And so if a section's not doing either of those things, then it doesn't belong in the book. And when I do the skeleton drafts, and maybe it's because I've written 40 books using this method, but when I do a skeleton draft, I find every single word is because this draft is focused on building the story and following the character. Every word of the skeleton draft ends up being functioning on those two wavelengths. So there tends to be very few unnecessary words in the skeleton draft that have to be deleted or swapped around or anything. Sometimes whole scenes will get swapped around. I realize things are in slightly the wrong order, but usually it's all pretty. It's very much the skeleton. It's very much the bones that hold up the rest of everything. So they have to be pretty solid. Otherwise, the whole story falls over. And I kind of have never had much of a problem figuring out how things transition, because like I said, I always come back to asking that question, what would the character do in this situation? And that's the transition.
Gotcha. We have 2 minutes left already. I can't believe this. I'm going to rapid fire some questions at you real quick, but everybody, the link for the handout that Steff put together for you is on the screen right now. So it's her complete method, so you can grab it and take a look. And then I'll have a link to her podcast, so you can listen to that as well. But Steff, do you think the skeleton method works for literary fiction, i.e. a less plot-driven novel?
I think it could, because again, it's all about building the story, and story is character-driven plot. So we're not just building plot here; we're building the character. We're getting to know the character, and I personally find that I can't get to know the character in an outline, but I can get to know the character in this way, and so I think that's the key. Rather than the genre of the book, if you're a writer who this type of outlining, is going to work for you, then it will work for you no matter what you're doing.
Gotcha. Anandita is wondering, when you write, do you know the last chapter or the end in the beginning? Do you know the specifics of how it's going to end, or most of the time are you just, how the genre needs to wrap it up?
Sometimes I know specifics, sometimes I don't. Often with romance books, I know the epilogue, but not the final, because often in a romance book, the epilogue is like 5 years in the future. And I often know what I want the 5 years in the future to look like, but not how they actually solve all their problems in the first place. And with the murder mysteries, a lot of it is genre based, because I know it has to end with the murder, figuring out the murder, and sometimes the hook of a murder mystery is how the crime actually fits together. But it kind of differs per model, per novel.
And then, so I'm going to combine these two questions into one. How long is your skeleton draft usually, and how long are your novels?
Skeleton draft is usually 15 to 20,000 words, and my novels are usually 70,000 to 90,000 words, sometimes a bit longer.
Great. Okay, well, guys, that is all the time we have for First Draft Friday. Thank you, Steffanie Holmes, for being with us to talk about your skeleton drafting method. Let me throw up your podcast. My mouse isn't working. Hang on. So you can learn more from Steffanie Holmes about her drafting and everything else at rageagainstthemanuscript.com. That's her podcast. Steffanie, thank you so much for being with us today. This was super fun. I learned a lot. I think this was a really smart, I love talking about this stuff. So I hope everybody else had a really good time, and thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lucy, and thank you so much, everyone, for coming, and I hope you found this useful.
Excellent. All right. Well, take care, everybody. Have a great weekend, and go write some more.